Good morning. My name is Pastor Mike Brink, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this week's online service. We at Park Avenue Baptist Church would love to connect with you. So if you have a prayer request or have a question about today's sermon, fill out the connection card in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching with us, and we hope you're encouraged by what you hear. Good morning, Park Avenue Baptist Church. We are in week 2 of our 3-week series, Clean Your Screen, Watching Out for What You're Watching. And we have an opportunity during these weeks to just examine our habits, particularly as it relates to screens and media consumption. But a lot of the ideas we're going to be talking about here are applicable far wider than just that. Last week, we presented our second Clean Screen Challenge, and that was to disconnect from screens during meal times this week, and also to come up with an average daily screen time usage estimate. Those are the two things we were interested in having you do. Hopefully you did those things and found some benefit, noticed some patterns, were able to recapture some time that you were invisibly losing, and that's part of our goal for these times. I want to review a few ideas from last week and get us set up to move ahead this week. First of all, I want to be very clear, this is not a technology bashing sermon series. That is not my goal, that is not my heart. Technology can be dangerous, but technology can also be leveraged for great good. And so we're not out to vilify technology. We're desirous to be wise users of technology. Because what connects us can also disconnect us. And that can disconnect us from God, from each other, from ourselves. When we become so busy with what's going on a screen that we forget to check in with God, that we lose relationship with other people, and we lose quiet space to really check in and evaluate ourselves and see how we're doing. The church has often leveraged fear and guilt to help people change their behavior. There can be some casualties of that. 2 that we talked about last week. 1, we get outward conformity when we need heart level change. And sometimes when we see the outward change that we want, we assume that everything under the surface is going well for this person, and that may not be the case. And secondly, when we use fear and guilt for behavior modification, often we will either rebel or get self-righteous. We'll either get sick of the behavior modification and the fear and guilt and say, I'm done with this, or perhaps more dangerously, we are so successful in our behavior modification that we get self-righteous and we think, oh, well, of course God would love me and approve of me. What's not to love? And it's a very dangerous spot for us to be in. We looked at a couple verses from Romans chapter 12. We're going to repeat those this week to set us up to launch into some new content. Romans 12, beginning in verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, dear brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And we closed out with this idea last week that do you harness technology as a tool that helps you to serve God, or are you being held hostage by technology, unable and unwilling to escape? Today we want to move ahead, and I want to start with this idea, this dangerous lie that we can fall into, and that would be this, that idolatry was a problem then, but we're over that now. As Paul was writing these words to the believers in Rome, they were in a culture that was saturated with idolatry, with false gods and the worship of them. And it's easy for us to look back at what Paul was encountering and what Paul was preparing them for and say, well, but that was then. But we're much more sophisticated now. We're much more advanced as a culture, and surely idolatry is not a problem. I want to challenge you with maybe what may be a new definition for you of what an idol is. An idol is a cheap substitute for God. And that means if we think about idols in that way, they are just as prevalent, if not more prevalent, and more insidious than they were in ancient Rome. I want to look at some verses together from Romans chapter 1 that help us to set up the danger of idolatry and how sneaky it is and how we get drawn in. And so we're going to look at these verses, Romans chapter 1 from verses 20 to 24. We're going to interrupt this a little bit as we go through to hit some key ideas. Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 20. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. That's powerful. Through God's revelation, his general revelation, and one of the sources of that is through creation. It is difficult to look around at the beauty that we see, the fall colors, a beautiful sunset, a majestic beach, a daunting mountain, and not go, there's a creator at work here. This did not just happen. And because we all benefit from those things, we all see those things, none of us have an excuse for not knowing God. Now, I want to pause here for a moment. God is not a hide-and-seek God. I think we've gotten this idea that, well, God, you got to be really spiritual to get in touch with God, and you got to be good. And if you haven't been good, if you've made mistakes, if you've sinned a lot, then God is inaccessible to you. And God repeats an idea over and over. We see it in Deuteronomy, we see it in Proverbs, we see it in Jeremiah, we see it stated by Jesus in the New Testament. I'll use the one from Deuteronomy 4:29. It says, and if you search for him with all your heart and soul, you will find him. God desires that you would know him. God desires that you would seek him. And he doesn't play hide and seek. He doesn't play, oh, you can't find me, you haven't been good enough yet. God wants to be known. And he's provided means by which we can know who he is and what he is like. God's word being primary among those. I heard this thought expressed recently. I don't have a source, but it's not mine. But this challenged me. Everyone wants the benefits of the kingdom without the authority of the king. And that is so true for us as people. We want all the benefits, but I don't want to have to answer to anyone. And if we acknowledge that there is a God, then we recognize there is someone bigger than me who I must answer to. And that's why I think many times we can be so resistant to the idea that there is a God. Well, let's continue beyond verse 20. Verse 21. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Now, Paul was talking about the trajectory of humanity, but that trajectory has not changed in this regard. Paul wanted the Roman believers to understand how people ended up in the situation they were in, but the same path is getting us to the same destination in 2020. So we need to recognize that this is an indictment of our culture and of our world and the way we naturally approach these things. Verse 22, claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And we have many, many people in our culture who would say religion and God and all of that, that's for weak-minded people, and we've grown beyond that. But that is sheer foolishness. Verse 23, and instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshipped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. And then verse 24. So God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. And the passage continues on, and a lot of times we exempt ourselves from it because we go, oh, that's talking about all kinds of despicable sexual sins. But that's just one tributary of this very corrupt river that wells up within our hearts when we abandon God, when we turn away and said, I don't want to know who you are, I'm not accountable to you, I will not listen. And that is fertile soil for idolatry to take place, because we were designed to worship something. And if we don't worship the one true God, we will replace that with something else. So, our lie, idolatry was a problem then, but we're over that now. And the idea that an idol is a cheap substitute for God, well, we still have an idolatry problem in our culture. Sometimes it involves our screens. Sometimes it involves the things on our screens. Sometimes it involves things that are completely unrelated to screens. But they happen in our lives. They happen in our hearts. So we really need a good and reliable idol detector. Because one of the problems is that often we can have idols and not even recognize it because we're being very religious at the same time. And God has become a component of our lives, but He is not the center of our lives any longer. We've allowed Him to be pushed to the periphery. And so I want to share with you 6 questions that can help us to evaluate if we have idols in our lives. Now, I want to warn you, these are not comfortable questions. These are a little bit ouchy. These are ouchy whether you have issues with media or issues with something else. Also want to let you know, these aren't original with me. I read these. I don't know if he's the original source. I read them from Kyle Idleman, pastor and teacher. And so I wanted to share these with you. So, 6 diagnostic questions that can help us detect idols in our lives. Number 1, what's the first thing I think about in the morning? I would add there, what's the last thing I think about at night? Often, if it's the last thing I'm thinking about, if it's the first thing my mind goes to in the morning. Now, does that mean that thing is automatically an idol? No. Does it mean we should take note and evaluate and say, wait a minute, is there something that has taken a preeminent role in my mind that I'm thinking about it so much? And we should watch out for that. In Psalm 5, the psalmist wrote this, listen to my voice in the morning, Lord. Each morning I bring my requests to you and wait expectantly. In this example, in this case, the psalmist made speaking to God a priority. And as a result, wanted to bring his request and then wait. And there was still a focus there on God. that allowed God to be central to his life. It wasn't like, I'm just going to sing my prayer and then move on with the important things of my day. No, I'm going to do some waiting, and I'm waiting expecting God to answer in some way, because that's the kind of God he is. Question number 2 that we can consider to detect idols. What do I consistently sacrifice my free time for? Yeah, I told you these were ouchy. Now, the fact that you give free time to something, does that automatically make it an idol? No, it doesn't. But if you see the preponderance of your free time all going in one direction, and it's not something that's helping to move you closer to God, you may need to evaluate, do I have something that has become an idol, or something that at the very least is moving me in that direction, where this thing has become more important to me and more central to my schedule than it should be. Question number 3. When I'm hurting, where do I turn for comfort? That's hard. That's you may be going, Pastor Mike, you're meddling now. But this is a really key question for us to grapple with. When I'm hurting, where do I turn for comfort? There are a lot of answers that people would give. Some of them we would find very acceptable, very understandable. We would kind of wink and nod and give them a pass. And other things we would be completely scandalized and shocked by. But they can all be idols. They can all be hazardous to our spiritual health. So, a few examples we can look at. When I'm hurting, do I turn to a relationship in my life for comfort? Do I turn to a parent? Do I turn to a child? Do I turn to a spouse or a lover? Do I turn to a friend and expect them to make everything better? If so, you may have an idol. What about food? We even have a category, we call it comfort food. And is that wrong? No. But can that take a wrong place in our hearts and our lives? Yes. If I'm counting on Ben and Jerry's to soothe me instead of taking my hurt to God, there's a problem. What about shopping? This is one I am very guilty of. When I get stressed out, when I'm feeling like things are out of control, I want to shop. Often that's something as benign as groceries. But if I'm using that to soothe my hurt, it's a dangerous thing. Binge watching a show, a series, just spending a lot of time in front of a screen can be a way for us to dodge the hurt that we're dealing with. It can be a way for us to say, I'm not dealing with that right now. I'm going to distract myself with an imaginary world, with somebody else's issues, so I don't have to think about mine. We automatically think about alcohol and drugs, those bad things that people use to soothe and to distract themselves. But often we think those are just bad choices, when in reality, those are often a last-ditch, desperate effort to escape from deep pain that they don't know how to deal with. And the people who have valid answers to their need are too good to get messed up with those types of people. And so, church, when we fail to step into people's lives and help them deal with hurt, they've left no other choice than to pursue these types of things. I'm going to say it, pornography can be something that people use to medicate the hurt that they are experiencing, to distract themselves, to please themselves, and it's a tragedy. We do these things. We all have something in our lives that could easily become an idol because we use it to find comfort when we are hurting. I heard this quote, thought it was excellent. Henry Blackaby expressed it this way. He said, "An idol is anything you turn to for help when God said to turn to him for help." That's pretty clear. That's pretty hard to sidestep. If you're going to something for help when God said come to him, you have an idol. Question number 4. When I'm confused, where do I turn for direction? And this is interesting, especially in a technology culture, because some of the most common Google searches are, what is the best whatever for me? Things are typed in there. What is the best diet for me? What is the best job for me? What is the best pet for me? What is the best credit card for me? What are the best colors for me to wear? What is the best haircut for me? I don't look that one up. What is the best mattress for me? What is the best workout for me? What would be the best college for me? And what would be the best retirement plan for me? You see, we are a people that are hungry for advice. We want to find out, how should I make this decision? I don't want to mess this up. I want someone else's advice. And that's a good thing. It can be. But we need to be careful, because I think sometimes we are so much more dependent on Google than we are on our God. Very familiar verses from Proverbs 3. It said, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding or the understanding of Google. Seek his will in all that you do, and he will show you which path to take." Now, I know we can argue back and go, well, but there's nothing in the Bible that's going to tell me which colors I should wear, or which mattress I should buy, or which school I should go to. But when we are seeking the heart of God consistently, he does help to guide us in those things. We need to be people who choose to stay close to him. Question number 5. When I feel empty, where do I turn for satisfaction? That is a slight turn on one of the earlier questions, but I think it's an important one. We can turn to some of those same things when we're feeling empty. We can become very performance-driven people to gain approval from others, and we need to be careful. I would express it this way. When we look for satisfaction in the things of this world, even the good things, it's like drinking salt water when you are already dying of thirst. It simply will not work. And that's a danger we need to be aware of, that we will not find ultimate satisfaction in this world because we weren't made for this world. Thank you, C.S. Lewis. Last question. When I feel insecure, where do I turn for validation? Ouch. I will readily admit, I can become very much a people pleaser, desperate for someone to notice me, to affirm me, to tell me I'm doing a good job. And that's all well and good in its place. But my value is not in what people think of me. My value needs to be in what my God says of me, what he has spoken over me, and what he continues to speak. And that's important for all of us. In Luke chapter 10, there's an account there of Jesus and his encounter with some people. They were friends of his, 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. And in this account, Martha is the doer. She is getting everything ready. She is getting a meal prepared. She is getting the house ready. She is managing 1,000 details. And once Jesus arrives, Mary kind of drops out of the process and goes and sits at Jesus' feet and just listens to him. Well, Martha gets more and more agitated and actually complains, "Will you tell her to come help me?" And Jesus' words are also words for us, good reminders for us. But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." Ouch. We are people of productivity, and so I think many of us resonate very much with Martha. And this rebuke, even though it was gentle, stings. It stings for us the same as it did for her. That we get focused on a lot of details and we lose sight of the thing that matters the most. Before we wrap up, I want to prepare us for our next Clean Screen Challenge by just talking a little bit about what is the point of these Clean Screen Challenges. Why are we doing this? Well, I want to start out by telling you what it's not about. It's not about heaping guilt on you for using your screen. That's not my goal. My goal also is not to help you earn righteousness and feel like, wow, I'm such a good person. Look what I did. No, neither of those is the goal. I don't want to make you feel bad about yourself, and I'm not out to make you feel good about yourself. So why are we doing this? These challenges are a tool to help us isolate and evaluate aspects of our screen usage that might otherwise go undetected. So our goal here is just to help you notice some things that otherwise might fly right under the radar. Some of you this past week may have noticed, wow, I've had a lot better conversations with my family members because we all chose to put our phones away at mealtime. You wouldn't have noticed that lesson any other way than by stopping. And so I hope you will join with us on these and do some learning together. This week's Clean Screen Challenge, if you choose to accept it, is to take your estimated daily screen time usage and try to be on your screens 50% less this week. Now, I'm talking about recreational usage. I know some of you, you're like, I use the screen a lot to do my schoolwork. Well, I'm not asking you to only go to school 50% of the time. You did not get that from me. I'm talking, and some of you, you work using a screen. I'm not asking you to chop that in half. I'm talking about recreational screen usage based on what you hopefully ascertained last week of this is about average. And for most of us, when we track that, we find out, wow, I'm using my screen a lot more than I thought I was. So hopefully if you did that, you now have a number that you can work from and you can say, wow, I found out that I'm on my screen for recreational purposes 6 hours a day. Wow, how did I manage that? All I want you to do this week is say, this week, these next 7 days, I'm going to try to be on no more than 3 hours a day. What are you going to do with those extra 3 hours? I don't know. But I think it could be really exciting to find out. So, that's our challenge for this week. I just want to close us out with these ideas. That an idol is a cheap substitute for God. It will never satisfy the way that God does, although it will make big promises. And when we ask ourselves hard questions, we invite the Holy Spirit to do deep work changing us. Change is not always comfortable. Sometimes it's really painful, but it can be very much worth it on the other side. Last things that I want to say first, our idols eventually betray us. They fail us. Have you ever seen the panic on the face of certain people if their device runs out of charge and they can't use it again until it charges up? Sometimes you would think somebody had chopped off their arm. Our devices break. Our devices run out of charge. All kinds of things can happen. Our devices, our screens, are not reliable. But God is. Depend more on Him. Depend less on whatever idols have taken up residence in your life. And then lastly, if you identify an idol, now what do I do? Well, the remedy is repentance. It's just telling God, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that this had become such a huge part of my life, and it has been taking away from you. God, I want to change. Help me to change. It may not mean giving that thing up entirely. It may just mean getting it back within acceptable boundaries so that God has the place that is intended for Him. I hope you will think further on these things, that you will have some good conversations with people that you love and with the God who loves you. Have a great week.